How are you guys doing? It is Monday, October 26th, 2020, here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to take you through yesterday's Elite performances from Sunday, October 25th. And of course, I'll let you know what's going on today, especially as sports go on. But first, to start off with Game 5 of the World Series, just to show you how that game's going and just to show you what's going on. The Los Angeles Dodgers, the top seed in the National League, were able to beat the Tampa Bay Rays, the top team in the American League, 4-2, in what would be a very big game, and which would move the Dodgers to within one game of winning the 2020 World Series. But first, looking out to how both teams fared. The Los Angeles Dodgers would score 2 runs in the first inning. A Corey Seager RBI single would put him up 1-0, and Cody Bellinger would put him up 2-0. And then Jock Peterson had a solo home run in the third inning that would put them up. In the third inning, the Rays would score 2 off of a Yandy Diaz triple and a Randy Arozarena single. By the way, Randy Arozarena would break the record for most hits in a postseason run. And then Max Muncy would hit a solo shot in the fifth inning to put the Dodgers up 4-2, and nobody scored after that. For the Tampa Bay Rays, the loss would be chalked up to Tyler Glasnow, who would allow 4 earned runs in 5 innings pitched, striking out 7 batters, and after him it went to relief, and nobody in relief gave up a run after Glasnow came out. Going on to the offensive side, the first baseman Diaz finished 2 for 3 with an RBI and a run. Of course, he had his first triple of the series. Their designated hitter Randy Arozarena would finish 1 for 4 with an RBI. Of course, having that record-breaking hit. Their left fielder Manuel Margot would go 2 for 3 as he ended up with a walk on the day, and their center fielder Kevin Kiermaier would go 2 for 3 with a run. Looking at how the Dodgers fared, the win would get chalked to Clayton Kershaw, the GOAT pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers, who with his 6 strikeouts set the record he now has the record for most career postseason strikeouts. He has over 200. I think he passed Justin Verlander for the most all time. Blake Trinan would get the win for the Dodgers, and Kershaw in the 5.2 innings he played would allow 2 earned runs and strike out 6 batters. Trinan would strike out 2 batters in the last inning, allowing no runs to help the Dodgers get this win. On the offensive side of the plate, their elite right fielder Mookie Betts would go 1 for 5 with a run. Their shortstop Corey Seager, who was the NLCS MVP, finished 1 for 3 with an RBI and a run. Their first baseman Max Muncy would go 2 for 3 with an RBI and a run. Their elite center fielder Cody Bellinger would go 1 for 4 with an RBI, and their left fielder Jock Peterson would go 1 for 2 with an RBI and a run as he hit his first home run of the series. Same with Max Muncy. Like I said, with this series, the Los Angeles Dodgers lead this series 3-2, and they are 1 win away from clinching it. The Tampa Bay Rays, with 3 losses against them, they have to win their next 2 games in order to win the World Series, and they can very well force this game. They can very well force Game 7 tomorrow night at 8:08, and that's what it's looking up. And then the matchup will be Blake Snell of the Rays against Tony Gonsolin of the Dodgers. So I have a very good feeling if Blake Snell goes the distance, because I don't see why he wouldn't. This game might go to a Game 7, and this has been a very impressive series so far. Also, really quickly, before I jump into football, I'm going to take you to international football, show you what's going on with soccer, especially with the big games yesterday, because there is soccer today. Looking through yesterday's performances in the Premier League, Arsenal lost to Leicester City as Jamie Vardy, who finished, I think, with the Premier League lead in goals last year. He ended up getting the only goal for Leicester City. Big win for them over Arsenal. Juventus would end up tying with Hellas Verona in Serie A. Kulusevski would score the only goal for Juventus. Cristiano Ronaldo, I think, was still on quarantine because I think he tested positive for the virus. Don't take my word for that. But no really big games as of yesterday, and looking to today, not a lot of big games. I mean, Tottenham Hotspur is going to take on Burnley in the English Premier League. AC Milan is going to take an AS Roma at 3:45 for their Serie A matchup. And those are going to be the 2 big games that take place, of course, tonight. And then really quickly looking out to the NFL in terms of what's been going on and Sunday of week 7. Starting off with the earlier games. First off, the Detroit Lions were able to beat the Atlanta Falcons 23-22 on the final play of the game. Of course, the Atlanta Falcons, I think this is their 4th loss in the final possession of the game. There has to be a record of some sort. But yeah, TJ Hawkinson would score on an 11-yard touchdown pass from Matt Stafford on the very last play of the game. And then the PAT would put them above, even though there was a 15-yard penalty added to the PAT. The Lions were still able to make it, and with this win, they are now 3-3 on the season. Looking at how the Falcons fared, their elite quarterback Matt Ryan would complete 31 of his 42 passes for 338 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, their elite running back Todd Gurley II would finish with 63 yards and 23 carries and 2 touchdowns on the ground. And of course, he's continued to make history. I think he's one of the youngest. He's like the 3rd or 4th youngest player to have 77 career touchdowns. Through the air, their elite wide receiver Julio Jones would finish with 97 yards on 8 receptions, as he also had a very big game. Todd Gurley II would also have 19 yards through the air to give him 82 total yards of offense to go with his 2 rushing touchdowns. On the defensive side of the ball, Keanu Neal, their safety, would lead the team in tackles. He had 11 tackles. He had a sack, and he had a whole other tackle for loss on the game. And then just continuing on, not much else going on for Atlanta. It's outside of Keanu Neal and Matt Ryan kind of killing it. For the Detroit Lions, their quarterback Matthew Stafford would throw for 340 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, their future Hall of Fame running back Adrian Peterson would run for 29 yards and 11 carries. Through the air, Kenny Golladay would lead the game in receiving yards. He had 114 of them on 16 receptions. And then Jayon Kearse would lead the team in tackles. He had 7 of them. Trey Flowers would pick up a fumble recovery. Jeffrey Okudah would finish, their elite cornerback would finish with 4 tackles on the day, as he had a good game. And then Romeo Okwara, one of the defensive linemen, would finish with 2 sacks on the game, the only 2 sacks of the day for the Detroit Lions. Big win for them, as like I said, they are now 3-3 in the NFC North. As with this loss, the Atlanta Falcons are now 1-6. They are 0-4 at home. Jumping into MetLife, the New York Jets, the only team that's doing worse than the Atlanta Falcons right now. They have yet to win a game through 7 weeks. The Buffalo Bills came into town, were able to beat them 18-10 for the New York Jets. Their quarterback Sam Darnold would complete 12 of his 23 passes for 120 yards, throwing for 2 interceptions. Through the air, Denzel Mims would be their leading receiver with 42 yards on 4 receptions. Frank Gore, their future future Hall of Fame running back, would have 60 yards on 11 carries. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Neville Hewitt would finish with 13 tackles. Same with Avery Williamson, as they were on defense a lot, considering the Jets didn't play a lot of offense. On the Buffalo side of the ball, their quarterback Josh Allen threw for 307 yards, ran for 61. He had 368 total yards of offense, no touchdowns attributed to him at all. Through the air, Cole Beasley would be their leading receiver. He had 112 yards on 11 carries. And then additionally, on the defensive side of the ball, Jerry Hughes, Jordan Poyer, and A.J. Klein would all leave the team with 6 tackles each. Jerry Hughes had 2 sacks on the day. Jordan Poyer had 1. On the defensive side of the ball, Dane Jackson and Jerry Hughes would pick up would have interceptions. Jerry Hughes would have an amazing game on the day with his 1 interception, 6 tackles, 2 of them being sacks. And then of course Tyler Bass, their kicker, would go 6 for 8 on his field goal attempts. But of course the 6 field goals that he made, 4 would be enough, as they ended up being the Jets 18-10. With this win, the Buffalo Bills are now 5-2 on the season, 3-1 on the road, and with this loss, the New York Jets are 0-7 and they're 0-4 at home, winning the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes. Jumping out to Cincinnati, they lost to their division rivals, the Cleveland Browns, 37-34, as this was yet another game that went down to the wire. In the very end, it would be a touchdown to Donovan Peoples-Jones from Baker Mayfield with 11 seconds left on the clock. That would give the Cleveland Browns the much-needed win over the Cincinnati Bengals. Looking at how the Bengals fared, their quarterback Joe Burrow would complete 35 of his 47 passes for 406 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He also had 34 yards on the ground to give him 440 total yards. He also had a touchdown on the ground. So to give him 440 yards of total offense and 4 touchdowns. Through the air, Tyler Boyd would be their leading receiver with 101 yards and 11 carries and a touchdown, or 11 receptions, for 101 yards and a touchdown. Their elite wide receiver, A.J. Green, would finish with 82 yards on 7 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Von Bell would finish with 8 tackles, another big stat for them. Joe Burrow fumbled 3 times. He lost one of them, but he still fumbled the ball 3 times. And then Darius Phillips would get an interception on the defensive side for the Cincinnati Bengals. For the Cleveland Browns, their quarterback Baker Mayfield would throw for 297 yards as he completed 22 of his 28 passes. He threw for 5 touchdowns and a pick as he helped lead Cleveland from at a point they scored 40 points they scored 20 points in the fourth quarter. At that point, they were down 20-17. Big win for the Cleveland Browns. On the ground, Kareem Hunt would finish with 76 yards and 18 carries. Rashard Higgins would be their leading receiver. He had 110 yards and 6 receptions. And then their elite receiver, Odell Beckham Jr., would only have 1 target on the day. He had no receptions for no yards at all. Ronnie Harrison would pick up a fumble, as he also had 9 tackles on the day for the Cleveland Browns, including a sack. Their elite defensive end, Myles Garrett, would finish with 3 tackles on the day and 2 sacks, as the team had 4 on the day. And B.J. Goodson would finish with an interception. With this win, the Cleveland Browns are now 5-2 on the season, 2-2 on the road. And with this loss, the Cincinnati Bengals are now 1-5-1 on the season. They are 1-2 at home. Jumping to Houston, the Houston Texans hosted the Green Bay Packers. As the Packers completely shut out the Texans 21-0 in the first half, and the Texans would score all 20 of their points in the second half, but it would just be too late. For them, their elite quarterback, Deshaun Watson, would complete 29 of his 39 passes for 309 yards for 2 touchdowns. He also had 38 yards on the ground to give him a total of, 347 total yards of offense. Through the air, Randall Cobb would have 95 yards on 8 receptions as he led the team. On the defensive side of the ball, Tyrell Adams and Zach Cunningham would lead the way. They both had 11 tackles each for the team, as the Texans were not able to register a sack for the entire game, but their goated defensive end, J.J. Watt, would finish with 5 tackles on the day. He had 2 of them for loss. On the Green Bay Packers side of the ball, their goated quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, would complete 23 of his 34 passes for 283 yards and 4 touchdowns. On the ground, Jamal Williams would finish with 77 yards on 19 carries and a touchdown. He also had 37 yards through the air. Of course, that would go on to give him 114 total yards on the day, and his 1 touchdown. Of course, he's been an amazing beast for them. Through the air, Davante Adams would be the leading receiver for the Packers. He had 196 yards on 13 receptions and 2 touchdowns. And then on the defense side of the ball, Raven Green would finish with 8 tackles along with Chris Barnes. Chris Barnes had a sack. Going on, that's pretty much how the Green Bay Packers fared. Also, their Adrian Amos will finish with 6 tackles and 1 sack on the day for the Packers. With this win, the Packers are now 5-1 on the season, as they're now 3-1 on the road. And with this loss, the Houston Texans are now 1-6. They're now 1-3 at home. Jumping to the Washington football team, they went on to face off against the Dallas Cowboys at home and were able to beat them 25-3. The Cowboys only 3 points coming in the first quarter. For them, Andy Dalton would throw for 75 yards. He completed 9 of his 19 attempts, throwing for an interception. Their elite running back, Ezekiel Elliott, would run for 45 yards and 12 carries. Through the air, Amari Cooper will be their leading receiver. He had 80 yards on 7 receptions, the only player with more than 2 receptions or even 22 yards. On the defense side of the ball, Leighton Vander Esch and Jalen Smith would log 12 tackles each, as their defense saw a lot of the field. Everson Griffin would log a sack as he's new to the team. And then looking at how the Washington football team fared, their quarterback Kyle Allen would complete 15 of his 25 passes for 194 yards and 2 touchdowns. Antonio Gibson will lead the game on the ground. He had 128 yards on 20 carries with a touchdown. And Terry McLaurin would lead the team through the area, 90 yards on 7 receptions and a touchdown. On the defense side of the ball, Chase Young, their elite defensive end, would lead the team with 6 tackles, along with John Bostic. Cole Holcomb would finish with a sack. Montez Sweat would have 2 of them on the day. With this win, the Washington football team is now 2-5 on the season, as the Cowboys are 2-5 as well so far. Going out to New Orleans to the Superdome, the New Orleans Saints were able to beat their division rival, the Carolina Panthers, 27-24. For the Panthers, Teddy Bridgewater would complete 23 of his 28 passes for 254 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not much going on the ground for the Panthers. Through the air, DJ Moore would be the team's leading receiver. He had 93 yards on 4 receptions and 2 touchdowns. And then on the defensive side of the ball for them, Shaq Thompson would lead the team with 13 total tackles on the day, and Brian Burns was able to log the only sack of the day for the Panthers. For the New Orleans Saints, their goated quarterback Drew Brees would complete 29 of his 36 passes, going for 287 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, Alvin Kamara would run for 83 yards on 14 carries, while also adding 65 yards through the air. That would give him 148 total yards of offense, even though he didn't log a single touchdown. That's a lot of ground to move. That's a field and a half, basically. Marquez Callaway would be the leading receiver. He had 75 yards on 8 receptions. And on the defensive side of the ball, Marshawn Lattimore and Marcus Williams would lead the team with 6 tackles each. And then Marcus Davenport would log the only sack of the game for the New Orleans Saints. With this win, the Saints are now 4-2. They're now 3-1 at home, as the Panthers are now 3-4 on the season. Jumping out to the only undefeated matchup, the Pittsburgh Steelers were able to beat the Tennessee Titans to be the last team remaining undefeated, beating them 27-24 after taking a 24-7 lead in the first half. The Titans tried to get back into it, but it just wasn't enough. Their quarterback Ryan Tannehill would throw for 220 yards and 2 picks. On the ground, their elite running back Derrick Henry would finish with 75 yards on 20 carries with a touchdown on the day. And then through the air, A.J. Brown will be their leading receiver with 153 yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Malcolm Butler and Jayon Brown would lead the team with 8 tackles each. Big games between the two. And then Tennessee would log 3 interceptions on the day from Dane Cruikshank, Jayon Brown, and Amani Hooker. But the Pittsburgh Steelers would prove to be the more formidable team. Ben Roethlisberger, their quarterback, with over 268 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 picks. On the ground, James Conner ran for 82 yards on 20 carries. And through the air, Juju Smith-Schuster would be their leading receiver with 85 yards and 9 receptions. And also Deontay Johnson would finish with 80 yards on 9 receptions and 2 touchdowns. And on the defensive side of the ball, Vance Williams would finish with 10 tackles on the day and a sack. Their defensive end, TJ Watt, would finish with 5 tackles with a sack and 3 tackles for loss. And with this win, the Pittsburgh Steelers are still 4-0. As with this loss, the Tennessee Titans are no longer undefeated, and they fall to 5-1 on the season. Looking out to Las Vegas, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were able to come in town and beat them 45-20 pretty handily. Looking at how the Raiders fared, their quarterback Derek Carr would throw for 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Through the air, Nelson Aguilar would be their leading receiver with 107 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Trayvon Mullen would finish with 9 tackles and 2 passes defended on the day. And looking out to Tampa Bay, their goated quarterback Tom Brady would throw for 369 yards as he completed 33 of his 45 passes. He threw for 4 interceptions as well and also ran for a touchdown, giving him 370 total yards and 5 touchdowns. On the ground, Leonard Fournette would be their leading rusher. He had 50 yards on 11 carries. And through the air, Scotty Miller would be their leading receiver. He had 109 yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown. Future Hall of Fame tight end Rob Gronkowski would finish with 62 yards and 5 receptions and a touchdown. Their elite wide receiver Mike Evans would finish with 37 yards on 2 receptions on the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Devin White would finish with 11 total tackles and 3 sacks. He had a pretty dominant game, and Antoine Winfield would have the interception of the day for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. With this win, they are now 5-2 on the season, leading the NFC South, and the Las Vegas Raiders now drop to 3-3. And jumping to Boston, the New England Patriots got embarrassed at home, losing 33-6 to the San Francisco Giants. For the Patriots, their elite quarterback Cam Newton would complete 9 of his 15 passes for 98 yards, throwing for 3 interceptions, also running for 19 yards on the ground to give him 117 total yards of offense. Damian Harris would finish with 58 yards on 10 carries on the day, and Jacoby Myers would be the team's leading receiver. He had 60 yards on 4 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Devin McCourty would finish with 8 total tackles on the day. And then Lawrence Guy would finish at the lone sack of the day for the New England Patriots. The San Francisco 49ers, Jimmy Garoppolo would throw for 277 yards and throw for 2 picks. On the ground, Jeff Wilson Jr. ran for 112 yards on 17 carries, running for 3 touchdowns. And through the air, He was able to get 8 yards to the air to give him 120 total yards of offense. Brandon Ayuk would finish with 115 yards on 6 receptions for San Francisco. And on the defensive side of the ball, Fred Warner would lead the team with 7 total tackles on the day. And Dre Greenlaw would finish with a sack along with Kevin Givens to help the San Francisco 49ers jump up to a 4-3 record. They are 3-0 on the road as the New England Patriots drop to 2-4. Jumping out to the Mile High City, the Denver Broncos hosted the defending Super Bowl champs, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Chiefs were able to beat them 43-16. For the Broncos, their quarterback Drew Lock would throw for 254 yards and 2 picks. On the ground, Philip Lindsay would run for 79 yards on 9 carries, and on through the air, Albert Ogwekbunam would finish with 60 yards on 7 receptions, and then on the defensive side of the ball, Alexander Johnson would finish with 9 total tackles on the day. And jumping out to Kansas City, Pat Mahomes, their elite quarterback, who of course was the MVP in 2018, finished with 200 yards on completing 15 of his 23 passes, throwing for a touchdown. Through the air, McCole Hardman would be their leading receiver. He had 57 yards on 2 receptions. Their elite wide receiver, Tyreek Hill, would finish with 55 yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown. And their elite tight end, Travis Kelce, would finish with 31 yards on 3 carries. And then jumping out to Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Chargers were able to get the best of the Jacksonville Jaguars, beating them 39-29. For the Jaguars, their quarterback Gardner Minshew would throw for 173 yards and 2 picks. On the ground, James Robinson would run for 119 yards on 22 carries and a touchdown. And then through the air, Laviska Shenault would finish with 44 yards and 3 receptions. And for the Los Angeles Chargers, Justin Herbert would be their leading passer, throwing for 347 yards and 3 touchdowns and a pick. He also ran for 66 yards on the ground, and of course, that's going to give me 413 total yards, giving you 4 total touchdowns on the day for the Los Angeles Chargers. And through the air, Keenan Allen would finish with 125 yards on 10 receptions. And Jalen Guyton would finish with 84 yards on 2 receptions and a touchdown, as he had a 70-yarder on the day. And Troy Maine Pope would recover a fumble. Rayshawn Jenkins would lead the team in tackles. He had 8 of them. Uchenna Nwosu would finish with a sack and a half. Big game for the Chargers, as they now jump to 2-4 on the season as the Jaguars fall to 1-6. And last but not least, jumping into Sunday Night Football, the Arizona Cardinals were able to get the best of their division rivals, the Seattle Seahawks, in overtime thanks to a field goal off of an amazing drive down the field led by Kyler Murray. And speaking of Kyler Murray, he finished the game completing 34 of his 48 passes, throwing for 360 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He also ran for 67 yards on the ground and a touchdown to give him 427 yards and 4 touchdowns of offense. Pretty dominant in this one game. And DeAndre Hopkins through the air would finish with 103 yards on 10 receptions and a touchdown. Chase Edmonds would finish with 87 yards on 7 receptions, and their future Hall of Famer, Larry Fitzgerald, would finish with 62 yards on 8 receptions. And on the defensive side of the ball, Budda Baker would finish with 14 tackles and a tackle for loss. Hassan Riddick would finish with 11 tackles, a sack, and 3 tackles for loss. And Drake Kirkpatrick would finish with 10 as well. And looking at the Seattle Seahawks, their elite quarterback Russell Wilson would complete 33 of his 50 passes, throwing for 388 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 picks. He also ran for 84 yards on the ground, and that would, of course, give him 472 total yards of offense. Incredible. Carlos Hyde had 68 yards on 15 carries, giving him a touchdown. Through the air, Tyler Lockett had 200 yards on 15 receptions and 3 touchdowns on the day, all 3 of Russell Wilson's touchdowns. Amazing game from him. DK Metcalf would end up chasing Budda Baker on an almost pick 6. And on the defensive side of the ball, Bobby Wagner, their elite linebacker, would finish with 11 tackles on the day. And then the Seattle Seahawks wouldn't log an entire sack on the day, and Quandre Diggs would pick up the only interception for the Seahawks, as Budda Baker, Isaiah Simmons, and Patrick Peterson, the elite cornerback for the Cardinals, all combined for interceptions. And with this win, the Arizona Cardinals are now 5-2 in the NFC West, and with this loss, the Seattle Seahawks are now 5-1, still sitting pretty comfortably at the top of their division. But now they have to keep an eye on the Arizona Cardinals. But of course, that's almost everything getting into it and looking into tonight's game. Of course, of Week 7, it'll be a matchup between the 5-1 Chicago Bears and the 4-2 Los Angeles Rams. That'll be a big one, but that'll be tonight. And today is Monday, October 26, 2020, out here in this quarantine. Once again, I want to thank you for listening to all 24 minutes of this piece. Thank you for listening to this piece, and peace out.